My name is John Passfield, and the title of this reading will be Ospringe Video 7, The Planning Notebook. This is my novel, Ospringe, A Visit with Granddad, a novel by John Passfield. That's my family there, my mother's family. My mother's the little girl in the corner. Her mother is seated on the far side. Her dad, in uniform, a Royal Marine, is beside her. Her three brothers are standing. And the grandfather, my mother's grandfather, and his oldest daughter are standing. That's my great-grandfather. So it's a family novel, and I'm reading from the planning notebook that I wrote while planning the novel. So, in this video I'm going to read from the planning notebook, which I wrote while planning and writing the novel. The title of the notebook is Planning Ospringe, and it can be found and accessed for free on my website, johnpassfield, all one word.ca. Covers a span of 10 years, 2002 to 2012, from the first note on the topic of a potential novel to the point where I had a complete rough draft to polish. The novel is 54,000 words, and the notebook is also, interestingly enough, 54,000 words. In this reading, I'm going to present 5 passages as a sample of what the Ospringe notebook contains. So here's the first passage which I chose. Yesterday, my brother and sister and our families met for Thanksgiving at Cambridge, Ontario. It was enjoyable, and I thought of the continuum of family gatherings. The grandparents and parents drop off, and the children and grandchildren are added, and the family gathering ritual goes on. I thought of the idea of a novel based on the kids, my mom as a child, and Claude, her brother, and their other brothers, leaving Ospringe in England on a Saturday and spending the day in Faversham, the larger town nearby, with Grandpa Henry Kennett. That's the fellow in the photograph. I may never do this, but it is intriguing. I think that it would be a nice and natural outcome of the family research. It would draw on Mom's interview and Henry Kennett's stories of the family ancestry. It would also include the story of Walter Davies as a Bernardo boy and as a Royal Marine, perhaps set in World War I or 1923. No hurry. I'll let this percolate for a few years. No shortage of ideas at any rate. Well, there's some references there I'll explain. The family research. This is my family book, Oak Street, The Passfield Family. That's my dad and mom seated there as the adults. I'm the little boy in the middle, and my brother and sister are there. So it's a book of family research. We all collect all these items of information about our families, and I, one year, 2009, put them all together in a paperback and gave them to my family. So in there's all kinds of information. Henry Kennett, the older man in that photograph, the grandfather in England. Walter Davies, the man in uniform. My mom's father, who is my grandfather, as a Royal Marine, served in the First World War. My mom and her brother, 2 kids in that photograph. So I thought, well, I could put all this into a novel, and eventually I did. But at that point I wonder if that would make a novel. Okay, here's passage 2 of the Ospringe journal. My mom and Claude, that is my mom and her brother, walk on a Saturday to Faversham, this larger market town nearby, to see their grandpa Henry Kennett, and then walk to Graveney, which was his birth village, born on a farm near Graveney. The story will contain everything that interests me about my family and the area of England my mom's family came from. My mom's novel, the title Ospringe, The Roman Spring. So playing on the name of the little village they lived in, as a Roman word meaning the spring. Well, Water Lane ran down the middle of Ospringe. Water ran down the main street. It came from a spring. It's 3 points here. Number 1, set about 1920 or 1921. So they left England in 1923. I'm asking myself, well, when would the novel take place? Whether it's a question of whether they will leave England and go to Canada. Number 2, after her dad had come home from World War I, an Archangel. Well, he served at Gallipoli in 1915. That's the man in uniform in the photograph, my grandfather. And he served at Archangel in 1919 when when the white Russian forces were still fighting the red Russian forces, and he was part of that British Expeditionary Force trying to overturn the Russian Revolution. And thirdly, first talk of going to Canada. So trying to figure out when the novel would take place in order to bring in all these ingredients all these elements that I had in my family factual account, I guess you'd say. The frame, well, Mom and Claude, my mother and her brother, go from Ospringe, the village, to Faversham, the market town, to meet Grandpa, Henry Kennett, at the fire hall. Then go for a walk through Faversham, maybe out to Graveney, that's the grandfather's hometown, and then back. The same road I took with Steve Mitchell, a resident of Faversham, when I was there. Then walk back home to Ospringe, evening, supper, and bed. So a typical day. Now the fire hall where Henry Kennett lived, this is actual and factual and historical. My mom and her brother called it the fire hall after they got to Canada, but it was a former police station that had been turned over to the firemen, and they left their equipment in there. And my great-grandfather, Henry Kennett, the kid's grandfather, lived there and kept the uniforms and all the equipment in order. So it is now the age concern I was going to add as well. It's where older people can go and have a cup of tea and so on in Faversham. It's still there, and I visited that building where they had lived. Very emotional experience for me, 80 years after they left England. Number 3, the third passage from the Ospringe notebook. Walter Davies, the dad, and Henry Kennett, the grandfather, have a little antagonism, will have in this proposed novel. Mom has overheard conversations. So here are 4 items that I think would find their way into the novel. I thought would find their way. Walter and Tris, Eltreta Kennett Davies, the grandparent generation. The idea of going to Canada, friction with Henry Kennett. So my grandparent generation. Going to Canada, what if the grandparent generation doesn't want the grandkids to leave? Number 2, Walter and Claude and the boys. Father's away at war, very glamorous, fighting at Archangel and so on. That will be in the novel. 3, Walter, the father, and herself, and Mom. His boyhood in London, his boyhood in Canada. So he was a Bernardo boy, was sent to Canada. He went back and became a Royal Marine. That's all going to figure in the novel, I'm thinking. 4, Henry Kennett and Claude and herself. The kids and their grandpa. They'll polish the uniforms in the fire hall. He'll talk about his life as a mechanic. He worked on farm machinery. He'll talk about his life as a fireman. There were some spectacular fires during those years. I looked up the Faversham newspapers. Her grandmother, who was dead by this time. And the Bible, which I have, and which I had when I was planning this novel, which had belonged to the grandmother as a little girl. The grandmother had died by the 1920s, so my mom never knew her, and my mom ended up with a family Bible, so I'll make that a part of this novel, I thought. All that I know can be part of this book I wrote. Number 1, my Uncle Claude, as a boy, passing his church chests and getting books and so on. Well, I have his books with notes in saying that he'd won them in a church event. 2, life in Kent in the 1920s. I'd gathered these newspapers. Everything I know and a lot that I would learn will be part of it. So just how am I going to put all these elements together in a novel? Some more items, 4 items. The loaf of bread in Water Lane. My mom dropped a loaf of bread in the main street, which was called Water Lane because water ran down the main street. Chaucer's Pilgrims, who would have passed 10 houses away from where my mom lived, in the Miller's house. Nurse Cavell. My mom saw the funeral of this British lady who'd been shot by the Germans and had a funeral in England in 1919, and it came through Faversham, that town. Aunt Trida, this Earth Mother aunt that my mom had talked about. All this will go into the novel, I thought, but it was all early days. Okay, that was number 3. Here's number 4. Jotted 3 pages of notes this morning on a novel about my mom. The title will probably be Ospringe, and I can see the shape that will allow me to include everything about the situation, both family and locale. It will be framed by a Saturday walk to Faversham and a walk to Graveney with Grandpa Henry Kennett, and will take in all my mom's memories and relationships, as well as conversations by her dad, her mom, her grandpa, and her others, including her Aunt Trida. So just an attempt to gather everything together in a shape, which would be a novel shape. Here's the last item. Excuse me. Uncle Claude died last night. Now, he was a real person. I was getting ready to write a novel about real people, so I'll hold this photograph up against a little glary. He's the boy with wire-rimmed glasses who's standing, the tallest boy, okay? So he's a little boy in Faversham, and there's my mom again in the corner, the little girl, and I'm going to write about them. And here he is as a real live human being, 95, and dying. My Uncle Claude died last night. He was 95 last March. I could write a long note, but I won't. I had just written about our rides through St. Thomas and Elgin in Canada a day or so ago. I saw him a week ago, and he was completely senile. I'd seen it happen to my mom over 8 years, so his senility was brief. To see someone you know ceasing to be themselves is sad and horrifying. It's like a 1950s zombie movie, but with all of the emotions of your childhood and adulthood coming into it. This was the boy who lined up on Sundays at the school and marched to church, who went with my mom on Saturdays to see Granddad in Faversham, which of course is in England, at the fire hall, which became 2 Middle Row, who won the books at the Church of England School, who chopped wood in Curwood, Ontario as a teenager, and who became the uncle with the cottage at Port Stanley, Ontario, in Canada, and the sexton of the Old English Church in St. Thomas, Ontario, where we will be buried. So I got to know all the information about my mom and her brother from long before I knew them. I knew them as adults, of course. I learned all about their childhood. And here is this fellow at 95 dead. Yesterday I roughed out the story of a novel that he will be a character in, along with my mom. He was also in the outer frame of Jumbo. So I originally started this novel with my mom and my Uncle Claude sitting beside the Jumbo statue in St. Thomas, Ontario. And then I go into the actual novel, you might say, of Jumbo and his life and death in St. Thomas, Ontario, my hometown. It's very sad because the brevity of life is sad, but it's also good news because for about 94 of his 95 years, he was a lucid, bright, and cheerful person with a tang of acerbity in his makeup. The funeral is tomorrow, Friday, so that was way back in the days when I was planning the novel. Okay, those are the 5 passages from the planning notebook, the Ospringe planning notebook. Here's a note that I wrote while I was reading this over, related but not directly related, more about novels in general. Let me give you a scenario. We're in a meadow on a mountainside in ancient times. An old storyteller is chanting a story. It's a story which he knows quite well, having heard the story first when he was a boy. The story which he's telling has been well digested, as it happened far in the past, and every word has been polished in the act of retelling the story over and over again. All of the storyteller's attention is concentrated on the story that he's chanting, and he hopes for a similar narrow focus from the listeners who are seated around the fire. However, a boy is listening to every word that the storyteller is chanting. He's taking in every word of the story that is being told, but the little boy is also aware of the faces that he sees in the flames as another log is tossed on the fire, aware of the sparks that rise to the heavens in the starry night, aware of the bleating of the sheep in the enclosure that he spent all afternoon helping to repair, so the sheep cannot escape and get lost on the mountainside. And he's also aware of the faint howling of the wolves in the distance, whom he knows will come closer when the shepherds are all asleep and the fire is burning low, and he will be on guard duty in the dark of the night with his aging grandfather. So, now I have a question for you. Would you rather read a novel with just the story that the storyteller is chanting in past tense, or would you rather read a novel with the story which the storyteller is chanting, presented as imagery inside the mind of the little boy, so that both stories are being told, one in past tense and one in present tense, as the boy's consciousness moves back and forth between the storyteller's story in past tense and his own present moment's thoughts as he thinks and he listens. Now I'm about to write a novel. I value your advice. Which of these ways of telling their story, which of these two choices of novel form, would you prefer my proposed novel to be? This planning notebook can be accessed for free on my website, johnpassfield.ca. Thank you for watching this video.